Look, I really don't remember how this thing works.
A fuel tanker accident in New York leads to a dangerous situation at an underground electrical substation. Firefighter Frank Sullivan, a baseball enthusiast with a happy family, disobeys orders to rescue trapped workers. His wife Julia is also a nurse, and their son John shares Frank's love for baseball. Frank, a firefighter, dreams of his son following in his footsteps, calling him Little Chief. Radio stations pick up strange signals due to the wind on a night with powerful northern lights. Fast forward 30 years to October 10th, 1999, John, Frank's son, has grown up, but chose a career in law enforcement over firefighting. Tragically, Frank had died in a fire 3 decades ago. On this particular night, John's girlfriend, Samantha, leaves him, leading a heartbroken John to seek comfort in a nearby stadium with a drink. Recently, a significant Aurora event, similar to the one 30 years ago, has occurred. John returns home as his best friend Gordo and his son come to borrow a fishing rod. The boy discovers an old radio in the trunk and is fascinated by it. John demonstrates how it works, but is interrupted when Gordo's wife calls them home. Later, John looks at old photos and articles about his father's death. Unexpectedly, the radio comes to life with a male voice, surprising John, who didn't think such an old device was still in use. After a casual chat, John discovers that the other man is nearby. They talk pleasantly about the man's favorite baseball team and the 1969 Baseball World Championship. John enthusiastically shares the game's progress and results, leaving the man skeptical as the match hasn't started yet. The conversation is cut short by signal interference. John is taken aback as he realizes he was discussing a match from 30 years ago. It turns out that the man he was speaking to was his father, Frank, who was from the past. As Frank heads back to his room, he accidentally breaks a window, mirroring a crack in John's present-day room door. The following day, Frank attends a baseball game and is taken back as the events unfold exactly as John had described. Meanwhile, John is at a different location where a human skeleton has been discovered. He begins an investigation, noting that a nearby family who tragically lost their son, who was a police officer, to a medical incident 30 years ago, lived close to the discovery site. That night, Frank attempts to contact John, curious about how John knew the baseball scores beforehand and eager to know about the next day's match. At this point, young John approaches Frank, asking his father to sing him a baseball lullaby. Fueled by love, Frank calls him Little Chief, a nickname that surprises the adult John on the other end of the radio. When John asks the man's name and hears Frank Sullivan, he initially thinks his friend Gordon is playing a prank. However, he soon realizes the truth when the radio frequency matches his own. John introduces himself to Frank, explaining that his father, Frank, was a firefighter who used to sing baseball lullabies to him and call him Little Chief. He describes his knowledge of the 1969 World Baseball Classic results, having watched the game 30 years ago at his lifelong home on 343 42nd Avenue. Upon hearing this, Frank becomes concerned, accidentally burning the table with a fallen cigarette butt. In an odd twist, a similar burning happens to the table next to John. John asks, "Did you just burn the table?" making Frank feel watched. Frank warns the perceived intruder to stay away from his family. John says, "But Dad is no more. He died in the warehouse fire on October 12, 1969. Frank struggles to accept his upcoming death. John further states, "Tomorrow, there will be a fire in the old warehouse. Dad instinctively chose a path back then. If you choose differently, you won't die." Their conversation is suddenly interrupted after that. The next day, Frank realizes that the baseball game and the warehouse fire occurred just as John had described. Faced with two paths in the burning warehouse, Frank initially chooses the smoke-filled one to rescue a trapped girl. However, recalling John's advice, he changes course and heads into the fire. Meanwhile, John experiences a shift in his memories. He asks his friends if his father died in a fire, but they, confused, tell him that his father passed away from lung cancer due to excessive smoking a decade ago. John realizes that the past has changed. He alone seems to hold two separate sets of memories, while those around him remain unaware. Upon returning home, he notices changes in the article about the fire, and a family photo now includes his father. It appears his father survived the fire. That night, John and his father engage in a joyful conversation about baseball and life. John advises his father to quit smoking. When Frank goes to pick up his wife from the hospital, she discovers a colleague's medical error. She intervenes, saving the life of a policeman who died 30 years ago in the original timeline. That night, John is haunted by new memories in his sleep. He tries to call his mother, but her number is now in a store, and his girlfriend Samantha no longer recognizes him. The following day, John visits the police station, where Uncle Satch informs him that the skeleton they found was the first of 10 victims of the Nightingale killer. John corrects him, stating that the nurse murders from 30 years ago only had 3 victims. Uncle Satch, surprised, questions John's memory. Upon opening the victim's file, John is shocked to find his mother listed as a victim. He rushes home to contact Frank, realizing that saving his father altered the past. The Nightingale killer, who initially killed 3 people, now has 10 victims, including his mother, who is set to be killed on October 22, 1969. John urges Frank to recall his actions after the fire. Frank said he visited his wife in the hospital before returning to work. John realizes that his father was supposed to die in a warehouse fire on October 12, 1969, which would have kept his mother away from the hospital. He figures the murders are linked to the hospital. Frank vows to protect his wife by removing her from the hospital. John worries about the other victims, realizing their deaths are a result of altering the past. They create a plan to prevent the murders by tracking the killer's patterns. Frank is tasked with saving the next victim, Carrie Reynolds, who is due to be killed after visiting a bar the next day. Frank goes to the bar and spots Reynolds, a nurse. As she mistakes his attention for interest and invites him over, John notices her file has disappeared, indicating Frank has successfully prevented her murder. John then contacts his father. The next target is Clark, a part-time cocktail bar waitress. Frank arrives early and locates Clark. When she goes to change clothes during her break, Frank is ambushed in the restroom by a man who grows suspicious of him. The attacker steals Frank's driver's license and attempts to strangle him, but Frank is saved when 2 people enter. After regaining consciousness, Frank rushes to Clark's house only to find her dead. He contacts John, informing him that the killer has his driver's license and expressing concern for his family's safety. John learns from his father that the killer had contact with a wallet, leading him to believe that it holds the killer's fingerprints. He instructs his father to hide the wallet where it won't be found for 30 years. Using fingerprint recognition, John identifies the killer as Jack, a former cop who was supposed to have died 30 years ago, but is now a private detective. John visits Jack's house and learns from Jack's father that Jack's mother, a nurse, was also murdered years ago, with her killer never found. John confronts Jack in a bar with a photo of his murdered mother, revealing that Jack was a suspect in the police investigation. To redirect suspicion, Jack had killed his own mother, as no one would suspect a son capable of such an act. Before John can accuse him, Jack challenges him. After returning home, John gets in touch with his father, Frank. He suggests that Frank anonymously informed the police about Jack's stolen jewelry, which Jack takes as trophies from his victims. However, their conversation is interrupted by a visit from Uncle Satch. The previous night, the police had found Frank's driver's license under Clark's body, making him a suspect. Satch arrives to escort Frank to the police station, explaining the situation to Frank's family. As Frank tries to forward this to John, a fight with Satch results in the radio falling. Frank tells Sam about his communication with the future John at the station. Satch, skeptical, points out the evidence against Frank, including neighbors witnessing him entering Clark's room and his fingerprints at the scene. Meanwhile, a baseball game is played on the television. Frank comes up with a plan. He convinces Satch of his innocence by accurately predicting the outcome of the match. As Satch leaves to meet Frank's wife, Jack sneaks into the police station and heads for Frank's interrogation room with the intent to kill. However, a policeman's timely intervention prevents Jack's plan. Sensing danger, Frank rigs an electrical trap in the room. When Jack returns, he's electrocuted and falls unconscious. Frank then triggers the fire alarm, causing chaos in the station and allowing him to escape. While Satch talks to Frank's wife, a baseball game catches his attention. The match unfolds precisely as Frank had predicted, convincing Satch of Frank's truthfulness. Frank escapes the police station, heads to Jack's house, and discovers a box of jewelry from the victims in the attic. Jack returns to attack Frank, who manages to throw Jack into a lake after a struggle. Meanwhile, Satch arrives at Jack's house and finds the murder evidence. The police search for Jack's body but find nothing. Having fixed the radio, Frank contacts John to inform him of Jack's death. However, John is puzzled as his mother is still missing despite Jack's death, and his memories of her haven't changed. As he grapples with this, Jack reappears and attacks him. Simultaneously, young Jack knocks Frank unconscious. He heads to the house, intending to kill Frank's wife, but young John intervenes. As Frank regains consciousness, he shoots Jack's hand, causing him to run. Meanwhile, John is in danger when Jack's hand suddenly vanishes. The room alters, and a confused Jack is shot in the chest. John returns to see his older father, who fired the shot. They share a genuine moment. Frank's presence is due to his successful effort to quit smoking. That night, the aurora had been visible for days before it disappeared. The following day, John plays in a community baseball game where his parents are safe and sound. He has a 4-year-old son, and his wife, Samantha, is expecting their second child. All is well. The film concludes with crucial details. The day John and Satchel discovered the skeleton, John learned about a nearby restaurant, which was Jack's home. Jack's father revealed that Jack had died 30 years ago due to a medical accident. Before the past was altered, the Nightingale case only had 3 victims. However, after John saved his father, his mother, who would have been at the funeral, was at the hospital instead. She stopped a doctor from giving the wrong medication to a patient, Jack. Consequently, Jack survived and went on to commit 7 more crimes. Man, what a mind bender. With this, the movie ends. Like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.